Well, hello, Dr. Selvi, and welcome to the Rebuilding My Health Radio podcast. I am excited to have you on today to talk about your personal health journey.
Hi, Casey. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of go back to the start of when you were having some health struggles, what you're experiencing, and how that really affected your life.
Yeah. So I was diagnosed back in 96 and I was in my undergrad of college. And it's interesting because looking back, I mean, I had symptoms all the way back to childhood. Hindsight, I think, is kind of 2020. I'd always had sort of a sensitive stomach was what my doctors would say, or, like a stomach virus. So, either nausea or diarrhea or an upset stomach. And gosh, I'm thinking back the amount of Pepto-Bismol and Mylanta and you name it over the counter symptom relief that I would take was astronomical,
Yeah.
and so I was, in college at Columbia University, pre-med, engineering, like no stress whatsoever, right? So
Intense.
yeah, for sure. And all of a sudden, the sensitive stomach started having diarrhea, and I would take over-the-counter anti-diarrhea meds, and it would help. And then it would come back, and it would help, and it would come back, and it just wouldn't stop. And then I was like, this doesn't feel okay. And so that led to deeper investigations. By this point, I was already frustrated because doctors had been looking, hadn't really been able to find anything. So I was like, they're probably still not going to find anything. But this time they did. And they saw I had inflammatory markers on my blood work. And then they said, okay, now we need to run deeper studies because there's something going on. We need to figure out what it is. So then they ran a radiological study, and they found some inflammation in my small intestine. And then after that, did a colonoscopy, found that I had ulcers inside my large intestine, and they did biopsies, and they said, well, you have Crohn's disease. And I said, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, they said, you have Crohn's disease. It's a chronic illness. There's no cure. You're going to be on medication for the rest of your life. And to my 19-year-old brain, I was just like, what? And
Yeah.
I didn't process or integrate or accept any of it. And I didn't know what was going to happen.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a lot when you're 19 to get a diagnosis that's lifelong. You're expecting a lifelong chronic illness and medication. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Did you have a history of any of that in your family or
No,
not
not that
really?
we knew of at all. I mean, my family's from very rural India. So, there were people who had digestive, problems, issues, right? Was it parasites? Was something else going on? Who knows? At that point in time, they'd go to the village healer, not to, someone who was actually going to run
Right.
blood tests or stool tests or anything like that. So, as far as
Yeah.
I know, no. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, that you say that like this kind of happened in college, which I think just, based on the interviews I've done, there's usually a triggering thing, like a major stressful life event. And so I'm sure, you feel like kind of college was like the crucible that brought it out
Absolutely.
finally.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
Yeah.
always been, I think, an overachiever, but now, being
Mhm.
at this really high caliber university where everyone's an overachiever, me
Yeah.
putting so much pressure on myself to want to go to medical school and to, still overachieve. There's a lot of stress that I was putting on myself, and I think my body was really struggling with that. In addition to not eating so great. I mean, I wasn't staying very
Mhm.
far from home, but college diets are not the best. Let's just be honest about that.
Yeah. And you're not sleeping as much, like
Yeah,
all the stuff you're not supposed to
yeah, exactly.
do.
Yeah. Um, sure.
Right, right. So then kind of how did you proceed? Like you maybe went on medication and how did things go from there?
Yeah, so they did put me on medication, which was steroids, which, looking back was supposed to be a short-term medication. I was on them continuously for 2 years. And spontaneously, I developed a perforation, a hole in my large intestine in my Senior year, final semester of college, I was working on my senior project. I can kind of laugh about it now because I'm like, the universe has a sense of humor. But at the time, all of a sudden, I'm in my dorm room and I'm like, I don't feel so well. I take my temperature, it's 104. My baseline temperature is 97 point something. So I was kind of delirious at this point, all student health purposes. I'm like, I'm not okay. Something's up. And the nurse, bless her heart, is like, oh, take your temperature again, change to some light clothes. And I'm like, my temperature is 104. Are you kidding me right now? Yeah. Got a friend then to walk me down to the actual clinic. They ran some blood work and they found that I had basically hardly any to nil white blood cells in my system. So the normal blood cell count should be at least 3.0. And I think mine was, if I remember correctly, 0.8. So there was signs of a raging infection and I had nothing to fight off the infection. And so my body was in some sort of crisis. Wind up going to the hospital. It took them a few days and some investigation to finally realize that there was a perforation in my large intestine. And this was an emergency situation. So they told my parents, they said, she's got 24 to 48 hours to live if we don't do the surgery. Because I was terrified. My parents were terrified of like, surgery. What are you talking about? What's going to happen? I didn't want the surgery. They didn't know, long-term effects, like, how is this going to affect her life going forward? And it literally came to that close of knocking, almost brushing with death, really, right?
Wow.
So the beginning of my surgery, my stomach was hard as a rock. And that's when I finally realized I'm going to surgery or I don't have a choice in the matter. And I woke up in the recovery room. I had 2 bags on my abdomen. So I had an ostomy, which was now, so I couldn't use the restroom anymore, whatever intestinal contents were coming out into this bag. I had another bag on the other side of my stomach. I had this huge incision down the midline of my stomach that they weren't able to seal fully. So I had gaps in the incision in between and 2 drains. And I was just like, what the heck just happened to me?
Yeah.
So to say I was shell shocked was, it's probably minimizing it. So yeah, between that, then they did tell me the good news was though that they could reverse it. So I wouldn't need this bag forever, they told me, but everything had to heal first. So I went through 9 months or so waiting for the incision to heal. In the meantime, I had a side effect from the steroids and I developed a compression fracture in my back.
Oh my gosh.
So I had severe osteoporosis. I was 22 years old at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. And then eventually they did the surgery. Again, I had complications post-surgery. Something with the anesthesia didn't sit right. I wound up in the ICU. My kidney shut down briefly. My liver shut down. I just couldn't process anything that was happening to me. And this was all before I graduated college. And I was just like, what the heck? So mentally, I was shut down and just disconnected from my body. All I could see was, I got to get to medical school. I got to get to medical school. And there's these dang roadblocks in the way. Like, I don't have time for this. But my body had other plans, right? So at some point, it's, I was like, okay, started to get better after that second surgery, went back to college, finished everything I needed to finish, and was able to get myself to medical school, but there was a cost. I was willing to try any medication they would give me. I was willing to do anything it took. And I wound up looking back. I wound up on a chemotherapy medication at one point. I wound up on some pretty toxic stuff. So yeah, that was, into medical school. I was just in this mentality of just push, do whatever it took. And my body kept paying a price and kept paying a toll until it finally got to a point where my body was like, okay, you need to stop. And how that happened was this old surgery site where they put my intestines back together years later, it started to narrow and I started to develop pain. And I was in pediatrics by this point. I thought I picked up a virus from the kids because I was nauseous and I was vomiting. And, I was like, okay, it must have been rotavirus or something that I picked up from the kids on the ward. And it wasn't that. It was my intestine that was narrowing. And this was a symptom. So eventually I had to step away from medicine altogether to get myself together. Went through another major surgery, and then the focus was on me. And I wasn't getting better.
Mm-hmm.
I was wanting to get to remission, which is, I think as the doctors would phrase it, where your disease process is quiet, that could last for months. It could last for years. It could last for the rest of your life. We just don't know. But, that seemed like the promised land at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get there because I was still stressing myself out trying to get better. It's kind of a catch-22. Now I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe if I take this medication and I do this and I do that, and I kept trying to do things as a
Yeah.
disservice to the body while needing more surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it got to the point where I don't even know which surgery it was at this point. I just remember laying on that table in the operating room, looking up at the lights, and I was just like, this can't be my life.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to
Yeah.
be more to life than that. I don't want this life anymore. And I was just, at that moment, I was literally like praying with all my might and whatever, power I believed in, and said, I'll do anything. I don't care what it is, do anything. And
Yeah.
that's when things started to shift for me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So you tried basically everything that conventional medicine had. It sounds like for Crohn's. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really you were not getting better. So,
No.
yeah. So that was that kind of your turning point to go, I'm going to look elsewhere.
It really was, because I mean, at that point, I felt like my back was against the wall. So I was on a medication prescribed for Crohn's, but I was on about 8 times the max dose, something crazy like that. I mean, so the maximum dose is supposed to be 10 milligrams per kilogram. So it's by body weight every 8 weeks. I was on 20 milligrams per kilogram every 4 weeks, which is a massive, massive dose of medication, and still really sick. And still my numbers were okay, but I felt horrible. And that's when I knew something's not working here. And then winding back up in the operating room, and I was like, something really has to change. This clearly isn't working. And that's what it took for me to realize, all right, there's got to be something else, right? So as I was recovering from that surgery, I had a cooking blog at that point in time because I love to cook. So I used to follow a bunch of other cooking blogs, and I'm looking through updates as I'm recovering. And one of the blogs was talking about how they went on this healing journey with their cat. And the cat was having joint pain and inflammation. It was just clear that it was all related. And they made these dietary changes because that's what the cat's body needed. And this cat started to feel better. And something clicked inside of me. And I was like, wait a minute, this has to apply to humans too. So I was like, started to look into what dietary changes could be. Because up until this point, my doctors were like, well, diet doesn't really play a role, or like trial and error. And I'm like, the inflammation's literally in my digestive system. How can diet not play a role? Intuitively, it makes 0 sense. So I went gluten-free, started to feel better. And I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. Got more energy. My joints were feeling better. My symptoms were better. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll make another change. So I went paleo. And I, went off of grains and, those inflammatory foods for a while. I started to feel even better. I was like, oh my gosh, now my numbers are getting better. Eventually I wound up getting to remission, but I plateaued when I hit remission. So I was feeling okay, but not great. And I was like, okay, there's something else here. And that was when I found this acupuncturist who started to show me what a holistic approach really looks like. So she would do things like she would take my pulse and she would ask, are you feeling angry today? And I'm like, wait, I learned to take a pulse, but I only know how many beats per minute the pulse is. What do you mean?
You can tell that from my pulse.
And she literally could. So I would start picking her brain. I'm like, what does this mean? And this emotion's related to the liver element, and that emotion's related to this. And there's different energy pathways that run through your body. And so every time as she was treating me, I would just keep asking questions and learning more and more and more about what it meant truly to be a human being, as all of those layers, right? As opposed to medicine, Western medicine, medical school, that we went into different systems, or, you're looking at the digestive system or the circulatory system, neurological system. And we would joke about this even in the hospital, right? It's like, the person has a headache, call a neurological consult, or the person is doing this, call a psychiatric consult. And all of the different specialties are now going to come and sit here and argue or who's right and what have you, right? And I've literally seen this happen so many times. But this Eastern medicine was just a whole different thing. It was like, wait, there's all these components and together they make a whole picture. And I was just like, wow, this makes so much sense.
Right.
And
Right.
so
Yeah.
that started to really blow my mind and open my mind open to possibilities and to ways of looking and understanding not just our bodies, but our whole entire humanness in a way that I never could before. And that
Mhm.
for me was just a game changer. And I was like, yeah, there's something here. There's
Mhm.
something powerful here.
Yeah. Right. Right. That everything is connected.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And were you also seeing some symptom relief with the acupuncture as well?
100%. And I feel like,
Mhm.
it went deeper than just symptom relief. I mean, that was probably the beginning part. But then as I
Mhm.
started to understand myself on a deeper level, I started to, the only way I can describe it is to unravel my connection to my disease process. So I was
Mhm.
so identified with, I have Crohn's this, Crohn's. It was all I could think
Mhm.
about, do, talk about, live, etc. Over time, I started
Mhm.
to realize that Crohn's was a part of me. It was a part of my life. It was not me.
Mhm.
And so I started to
For sure.
unravel, yeah, and realize who I truly am, which started with acupuncture. It went a lot deeper than that through deep inner work, the spiritual path, connection to myself through starting through meditation, things like that.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, it all started there where I was just like, okay, literally everything plays a role. What I put in my mouth plays a role. What I'm
Mhm.
thinking plays a role. My past traumas play a role. My
Mhm.
past actions play a role, right? Unprocessed emotions that are still inside play a role. And I was just like,
Mhm.
wow, this is so much more than just a pain in the stomach or, like
Mhm.
going to the restroom 3 times. Like there's so much more here. And then it became this process of discovery of just like, wow, okay, what else is here? What
Mhm.
else wants to be looked at? And every symptom I started to understand is an invitation from my body, right? My body crying out for attention. What is it? What is it telling me? What is it communicating it to me, right? And I don't need to
Mhm.
fight that. I can work with
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Which is a mind shift, a mindset shift, to, yeah. And when something comes up to be, instead of like, kill it, fight it, battle it, um, yeah, what do I need to learn from it?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, what did you find in terms of the mind body practices, were the most effective for you?
Mhm. Sure. I think it's interesting. I mean, I think I started probably more with journaling, like a lot journaling.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice.
Because I was a very heady person. I know me being in Western medicine is probably a shocker that I was a heady person, but I had to start dumping a lot of the stuff that was in my head, right? All of these thoughts that I was carrying, all of this um, beliefs that I was carrying that weren't even mine. I started to work through those, right? To write them out and to be like, what's really true here, right? How much of this have I been told? How much of this am I carrying that someone else told me? And how much of this really comes from deep inside? That helped to drop a lot of mental weight for sure.
Mhm.
Meditation was huge for me. And then eventually at some point, once I started to kind of, build a deeper connection to my body, start to understand that we're not at war here. I don't need to fight my body, control my body, any of that, that we're literally in this together. I'm no one and nothing without my body. Then I started to be exposed to the work of people like Deepak Chopra, Joe Dispenza, and started to understand the power that our minds have to help us heal, or conversely, to create more illness, stress, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff, right? So I remember going back to have a colonoscopy, and I was terrified because I'd had this colonoscopy that was um, traumatic, to be honest. I mean, not to, make it sound like something it wasn't, but I had a narrowing in my intestine, and they actually pushed the scope through the narrowing, which you never do. Like that is not okay in any realm, in any, I don't even know what possessed them to do it.
Yeah.
And I was in pain. I felt like I had a minor surgery for almost a week afterwards. And so my mind was terrified, right? The next colonoscopies are going to be like this. And so one of the tools that I learned was, the power that your mind has, right? So I started to meditate, but I also started to use the power of visualization inside my intestines, right? To visualize and to really truly believe how they would look if they were healthy and normal and vibrant. And I started to do it over and over and over and over. And the next colonoscopy was clean, like no strictures, no sign of inflammation, nothing. And I was like, holy crow. Okay, this is powerful. So I wanted to go deeper into that. And eventually it led me to the world of energy work and energy healing and that sort of thing. So, but I always come back to those core practices of meditation and journaling, and inner child work was one that was just so fun. I was like, oh my gosh, there's this tender little part of me that I can connect to, right? She plays a role. And yeah, so.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So, and I mean, you did ultimately reach remission. Sounds like, yeah.
It's funny now because I remember when I reached remission, I was like, oh, yay, but I still hadn't been feeling all that great. So with time, I've used this phrasing of how I like to describe it now is beyond remission, because it's not even a thought. Like Crohn's is not even a thought. It doesn't play a role in my daily life. I feel the most alive I've ever felt in my life. I feel the healthiest I've ever felt in my life. And I feel like sometimes in the wellness space, the word thriving is almost overused, but I really, truly feel that I am thriving and I am living, like truly living, right, according to what I want to do. Like I've gone from this state of where I was just existing, every day was filled with just pain and frustration and torture to some extent, like physical pain, mental pain. Like, is this ever going to change? I'm told that I need to accept this new normal, but I really can't, to now being like, I can travel if I want, I can go out to restaurants if I want, I can go for like long walks, I can do whatever I want. And there's no limits to what my mind believes is possible and what my body can support me to do. And I've realized that that's really what's possible, no matter what your symptoms might be, no matter what your diagnosis might be, that the body is capable of healing to extents that our minds can't even comprehend.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful.
Thank you.
So one thing that I noticed on your site that you said is, I want to dig into more, is working at the body's speed is the only way to heal. And I would love for you to explain a little bit more about what that means. And then also how you do that. How do you know what speed, your body needs to heal and go at that speed?
Yeah. So the first place that I started to understand that was personal experience, because to me, it's funny now looking back, right? So I was like, oh, okay. So if I do like this dietary change and I add these supplements and I do X, Y, and Z, then therefore I should be here in 6 months. And my body's like, no, can we talk about this?
I love that.
Because when we start making a lot of changes, right, our minds think that we can think our way to wellness, that we can think our way through everything and anything. And there are certain places where absolutely we can, right? Maybe it's a solution to a business problem or something you're working on at work or something like that. But health, wellness, the body is just, it's very different. And what happens is the longer that we've been sick, the longer that we've been struggling, our bodies truly don't feel safe. And that's something that I understood, was that my body didn't feel safe, didn't feel relaxed enough to be able to be in a state where it could start to heal, to repair, and to come back into balance. Because the truth is, all our bodies want to do is to come back to balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
once I started to realize that, the big thing for me was that I started to understand that I can't rush it and I can't
Mm-hmm.
push it, that I really need to go slow. And initially that was baby steps, like absolute baby steps. And so what I've learned, like with working with clients, is it's literally the same thing. Their bodies need to feel safe. Their nervous systems need to feel safe. And until and unless that happens, there is no repair that can really, truly happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think from my understanding, yeah, there's a lot of sort of almost trauma that's built up over years of being sick. And for you, all the scary surgeries and things that were happening. Yeah, of course your body didn't feel
Yeah,
safe.
for sure. There's
Yeah.
the stories, right, that we've all told ourselves if we've been sick for days, weeks, months, years, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why can't you heal? What is wrong with you? Right?
Yeah.
You piece of, fill in the blank, right? Like you can't, I mean, I would tell myself literally, like, you can't even poop like a normal person. Are you kidding me right now?
Yeah. Right.
And I can't be telling myself that in 1 minute. And then in the next breath being like, okay, we're going to do these 10 things and we're going to heal. My body's like, you were just telling me that I can't do anything right. Guess what?
Right. Yeah.
So there's a path to get there, right? And so what I mean by that, by working at the body's pace, is really slowing down, is really starting to redevelop a connection with our bodies, which can be terrifying to our minds as well, right? So it's our body needs to be able to trust us, and we need to be able to trust our body. So we start building that bridge back through the lens of safety, through soothing the nervous system, to realizing that we are okay, because ultimately this body is home. This is where we live this lifetime, right? And what if we could learn to not just coexist, but to really understand each other and to really work together, right? And that takes time, and it takes intention, and it takes focus, and it takes letting go of a lot of things that you might have thought to be true. But conversely, if you're willing to do that and you're willing to stay with it, what's possible on the other side is incredible. And I see women get back in touch with their creativity as a side effect of doing this work, like in addition to being able to stay off of medications, or getting themselves to remission and taking on a new job, or, being able to be present with their families, or, realizing a long lost passion or a hobby. Like, you start to feel alive in a deeper sense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, Dr. Selvi, yeah, everything you've shared, I think, is so enlightening, and such an important dimension of healing that we don't talk about much or enough. So what advice would you give to others who maybe are struggling with their health?
So first and foremost, I would say if something is a problem or an issue to you, it's a problem or an issue, period. I can't tell you how many people come to me still and they're like, well, my doctor says it's in my head, or I'm feeling XYZ way, but my blood work or my studies are all normal. And they're telling me that it's not real. I'm like, it's real. If you're feeling it, it's real. Yeah. So that would be number one. And number two, trust yourself. Right? If your intuition, if your inner sense is telling you that you need to either do something, or there's an answer out there that you haven't found yet, or whatever it might be, trust that, because that's coming from your deepest truth, and that will always, always, always lead you in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're the one, like you said, you're living in your own body. And so that intuition is pretty powerful, that, something is off. Not feeling normal. Yeah. And I'm curious, is there something that you wish more people knew in terms of their health or their healing?
Yeah. I mean, I wish that people knew just how much their bodies are capable of. I feel like there is so much misunderstanding around our bodies, right? There's so much, there can even be shaming around what our body is doing, whether it's a hormonal imbalance or an autoimmune disease, or just not looking or feeling a certain way when someone else is. And when we are able to, reconnect to ourselves, what is really truly possible in terms of healing, in terms of possibility, in terms of, if you believe in things like manifestation, abundance, all of that, like, to really opening you up to that infinite capability, things that your mind can't comprehend, your body is absolutely capable of. I mean, my core was numb for over 10 years, 15 years, couldn't move my muscles, total compensation in my shoulders, all sorts of things. I'm still working on it, but my core is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I'm just like, wow.
Yeah.
1998 was my first surgery. So we're talking 25 years later, healing is still possible.
Yeah. Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It was such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it. And all the things that you've learned along the way. So where can listeners find and follow you?
Course. So my website has all the things. So www.drselvi.com. That's drselvi.com. That's my one stop for everything, information on how you can work with me, who I'm about, all of that kind of stuff. You can also follow me on Instagram. My handle's at dr.selvi.coach, or on Facebook, which is my first name and last name.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, your site is very calming. I was on your site earlier. Yeah, it's kind of immediate calming. So
beautiful.
So nice. Yeah. Well, Dr. Selvi, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your willingness to open up and share your story. I know that it will touch others and be really insightful for others who maybe are plateauing, like you said, your experience was. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.